Could you step outside, Clara? This is for family only. Deborah didn't even look at me when she said it. She was adjusting the blanket on my mother's bed, pretending I wasn't standing right there in the doorway. Her voice was soft but sharp enough to cut through the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Michael stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor like he wanted no part of this. No one said a word to stop her. I just stood there holding a small bouquet of lilies, still wrapped in the thin plastic from the hospital gift shop. The smell of antiseptic mixed with their sweetness. And for a second, I felt my throat tighten. I am family, I said quietly. My voice barely reached them. Deborah finally looked up, a slow smirk forming as if I'd said something ridiculous. Sure you are, she replied, straightening the edge of the blanket again. But we're talking about immediate family. Her words landed like she was reading a rulebook I hadn't been given. I looked at my brother, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he didn't. He just sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I understood what that meant. It always meant the same thing. Stay quiet. Don't cause a scene. I stepped further inside, ignoring the weight of their stares. My mother lay so still that for a moment I wondered if she could hear us. Her hair had gone thin and gray, her face pale and fragile against the pillow. I placed the flowers on the table beside her bed and whispered, "Hi, Mom." No one responded. The nurse standing by the chart cleared her throat gently. "Excuse me, ma'am, can I have your name for the record?" I turned toward her. "Clara Steve. I'm her daughter," I said, my voice steadier now. She nodded, scribbling it down. The sound of her pen filled the silence that followed. Deborah let out a small mocking laugh. "Oh, right, the nurse daughter." She said it like it was a punchline, her eyes flicking toward Michael. "How long has it been since you visited, Clara? 2 years?" I took a slow breath, keeping my hands clasped in front of me. "Work's been busy," I said. "Hospitals don't close." It wasn't an excuse, just the truth. But truth never mattered much in this family. Michael finally looked at me then, his face tight with something I couldn't read. "She's been through a lot," he said quietly, meaning Mom, not me. "Let's keep things calm." Deborah rolled her eyes. "It's calm," she muttered, but I could feel her irritation like static in the air. I wanted to tell them how many nights I'd thought of calling, how many times I almost did. I wanted to say I came now because no matter what happened, I still cared. But those words would sound weak here. They never believed softness meant strength. I watched my mother's chest rise and fall under the thin hospital sheet, slow but steady. For years, I'd been the one who never needed help, never asked for it, never made trouble. I thought that would earn respect. Instead, it made me invisible. Deborah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled faintly. "It's the insurance rep," she said to Michael. "They want to confirm your authorization." The nurse turned from the chart. "Actually, we already have a primary contact on file." Deborah frowned. "That would be Michael, right?" The nurse shook her head. "No, it says Clara Steve." The room went silent. Even the heart monitor seemed quieter. Deborah's expression froze halfway between surprise and annoyance. Michael blinked, confused. "That can't be right," he said. "Mom always—" The door opened before he could finish, and the doctor walked in holding a folder. "Afternoon," he said calmly. "I just wanted to update you all. Mrs. Steve's condition is stable, though we'll keep her under observation." He glanced at the folder, then at me. "And for the record, Ms. Steve, since you're listed as the primary contact, we'll need your signature on her care authorization." Deborah's mouth opened, then closed again. "Wait," she said slowly. "You mean her?" The doctor nodded, handing me the form. "Yes, ma'am. That's what the paperwork indicates." I took the folder in both hands. My palms were cold, but my heart felt strangely steady. I read the line near the top. "Primary emergency contact. Clara Steve. My name. Clear as daylight." My mother had written it herself. No one spoke. Michael looked at Deborah, and she looked back at him, waiting for him to fix it somehow. When he didn't, she turned to me with that same bitter smile. "Guess she pitied you," she said softly. I didn't answer. I just nodded, signing the form where the doctor pointed. My handwriting shook a little, but I didn't mind. I'd spent my whole life trying not to take up space. Maybe it was time I did. The doctor thanked me and stepped out. Deborah sat down beside the bed, muttering under her breath. Michael followed her lead, staring at his shoes again. I stayed standing, letting the air settle. The lilies on the table had started to open, their scent spreading gently through the room. It was a small thing, but I felt like the room smelled different now, like something honest had finally made its way in. People always act like silence means weakness, but sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you standing. If you've ever been treated like a stranger in your own family, stay. I think you'll understand what I mean. Leave it to Michael, Mom used to say whenever something broke in the house. He's better at that sort of thing. It didn't matter what it was, the car, the bills, even deciding what we'd have for dinner. My opinion was never needed. I got used to it, that quiet role of being helpful but invisible. I learned early that silence kept the peace. When I was 15, I remember baking her a cake for her birthday. Simple vanilla with frosting, I'd made from scratch. She took one bite, smiled, and said, "You should have asked Michael to decorate it. He's always had such good taste." I laughed back then, pretending it didn't sting. But even now, standing in that cold hospital room years later, I could still taste that moment. Michael always had a way of shining. He didn't even have to try. He was the golden one, charming, impulsive, the kind of man people forgave before he apologized. When he wanted to study business out of state, Mom cashed a retirement bond to pay for it. She said it was an investment in the family's future. I stayed behind, worked at a diner, and paid my own tuition for nursing school. I thought that would make her proud. It didn't. She told me I worried too much, that I didn't know how to live like Michael did. But living like him meant never looking back at the people who held you up. After nursing school, I started working at Portland General. Double shifts, long nights, patients who needed more than I had to give. Every time I called home, the conversations were short. "Michael's doing so well," Mom would say. "He might buy me a new car." Then silence. I'd tell her about my patients, about how I'd been promoted to charge nurse, but she'd already be distracted by something in the background. Probably Michael on speakerphone, talking about his next big plan. Now, as I stood by her bed, the same pattern played out. Michael was the one who mattered. Deborah hovered near him like she owned the air in this room. When she spoke, everyone listened. When I spoke, it was like my voice was a soft hum no one could hear. The smell of disinfectant pressed against my throat. I watched the lines on the heart monitor rise and fall. I'd seen that rhythm 1,000 times, but it hit different when it was your own mother lying there, the woman who once told you not to take things so personally. "Michael," I said quietly, "she looks weaker today." He didn't look up. "The doctor said she's stable." Then he turned to Deborah, asking if she'd called the insurance yet. I felt that old ache in my chest again, that dull reminder of where I stood in this family. I used to tell myself that being useful meant being loved. I'd fix the small things no one noticed, paying the hospital bills early, checking on Mom's prescriptions, sending groceries when she said she didn't need them. Every act of care felt like a silent offering, a way of saying, "I'm still here." But I was never seen. Birthdays came and went. Some years, they forgot to call. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my own life, my own place. But I think deep down I still waited for them to see me. Now I stood by her side, watching the machines keep her alive, wondering if she'd chosen me as her contact out of love or guilt. Maybe she realized too late that I was the one who never left. Deborah broke the silence first. "You can go, Clara," she said, softly, almost kind. "We'll handle everything here." I wanted to tell her that I'd handled things all my life, that handling things was the only reason this family hadn't fallen apart years ago. But I just nodded, forcing a small smile. As I reached for my bag, the doctor appeared in the doorway. His voice was calm, professional. "Ms. Steve, before you leave, there's something your mother wanted you to have, privately." My fingers froze around the strap. Deborah's eyes flicked toward him, sharp with curiosity, but he was only looking at me. For a brief second, I felt something shift. Small, quiet, but certain. Like the air in the room had changed. The hallway smelled like coffee and disinfectant, that same tired mix every hospital carries. The doctor stopped me before I reached the elevators. He was holding something in his hand, a small white envelope, the kind that looks too light to matter but too personal to ignore. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes lingered for a second longer than usual, like he knew it might not be an easy thing to open. My name was written on the front in shaky blue ink. Clara. The C looped higher than it used to. She always wrote that way when her hands hurt. I didn't open it right away. I held it by the edges, afraid that if I tore it too fast, something delicate would break. The doctor nodded once, giving me that quiet professional sympathy they all learn to wear, and left me standing by the window. Outside, the sky looked washed out, not quite gray, not quite blue. I slipped my finger under the seal. The paper made a sound like a sigh. Inside was a single folded page and another sheet clipped to it. The first line stopped me cold. "If you're reading this, Clara, then I'm already resting." My mother's handwriting trembled across the paper. "I know you've carried more than I ever saw. I chose you because you always finish what you start." My hand shook as I turned the second page. It was a copy of the hospital's medical directive. Next to the printed line that read "Legal Healthcare Proxy," her signature curved beside my name. Not Michael's. Mine. For a moment, I didn't breathe. The hospital noise faded behind me. All the years of being overlooked, dismissed, left out of every decision, they ran through me like a film I couldn't pause. And now this. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something heavier. Vindication without joy. Proof that she had seen me, even if it came too late to say it out loud. I folded the letter back neatly and slid it into my purse. My fingers brushed against the edges like it might vanish if I didn't hold on tight enough. Then I straightened up and walked down the hall. My footsteps echoed against the linoleum. Laughter spilled from the room before I even reached it. Deborah's voice was high and cheerful, the way people sound when they want to be overheard. Michael was probably right beside her, making some joke to fill the silence. I stopped at the doorway, taking a breath. The envelope suddenly felt like a secret too large for my hands. When I stepped back inside, Michael looked up first. "You were gone a while," he said. I nodded. "The doctor had some paperwork for me." Deborah smiled without looking. "Probably another form for the nurse to sign." Her words landed lightly, but her eyes stayed sharp, watching for a reaction. I didn't give her one. I just moved to the chair by the window and sat down. The envelope rested in my lap, its crease still warm from my hands. I could feel both of them glancing at it, pretending not to. The silence stretched thin. I could almost hear the clock on the wall ticking. Michael's voice cut through it. "What did she give you, Clara?" He tried to make it sound casual, but I heard the edge in it, that mix of curiosity and suspicion he'd inherited straight from our mother. I looked at him, calm. "Something meant for me," I said. Then I looked back at the floor. For once, he didn't have a reply. Deborah shifted uncomfortably, her hand brushing his arm as if to remind him to stay quiet. The laughter that had filled the room moments earlier was gone. The air felt heavier now, thicker. I turned the envelope over once more, tracing my mother's handwriting with my thumb. The lines were faint, but they were still hers. Every word felt like an apology she couldn't say aloud. I didn't owe anyone in that room an explanation. Not anymore. The table was set like it always was at Michael's house. Expensive wine glasses, a centerpiece too big for the space, and that faint smell of lemon cleaner that never quite hid the tension underneath. Deborah poured herself a drink before anyone sat down. "Let's get this over with," she said, waving her hand toward the empty chair beside her. I took it, even though I knew she didn't want me there. Michael sat at the head of the table, flipping through a thick folder of papers. "We need to be practical," he said. "Hospital costs are adding up, and if Mom doesn't make it, we'll need to figure out how to handle what's left." His tone was calm, but it had that edge I remembered from childhood, the one he used when he wanted control without saying it out loud. Deborah leaned back in her chair. "I'm sure the will covers everything," she said. "Mom always said she wanted things fair. Michael's been managing her finances for years. It just makes sense." Her words were polished, rehearsed, but every syllable pointed straight at me. I kept my hands in my lap, fingers tracing the hem of my sleeve. "Fair," I repeated softly. The word felt heavy, almost mocking. I'd spent years sending money home when things got hard. When the roof leaked, when the hospital bills piled up. No one called it fairness then. They called it help. Michael looked up from the papers. "You've done your part," he said, the way someone would thank a stranger. "But Deborah's right. Mom trusted me with this stuff. You've been busy with your job." He didn't mean it as an insult, but it still landed like one. "I'm her healthcare proxy," I said quietly. His pen froze mid-line. Deborah's laugh came before the silence even had time to breathe. "You? Please. Mom would never trust you with anything that matters." I didn't answer. I reached into my bag and pulled out the document the doctor had given me, the one with my mother's signature still faintly pressed into the page. I laid it flat on the table between us. "You can read it," I said, "if you want to." Deborah leaned forward, her smirk faltering just slightly. "This is ridiculous." She turned to Michael, expecting him to brush it off. He didn't. His eyes scanned the page, moving slower with each line. When he reached the bottom, his hands started to tremble. He whispered, "This can't be right." His voice cracked on the last word. I looked at him, calm. "It's her handwriting," I said. "You'd recognize it if you'd answered her calls." The room went quiet. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to stop. Deborah reached for the paper, but Michael pulled it closer, staring at the signature like it might disappear. "Why would she, he started, then stopped himself. I knew the answer. Because I showed up. Because I stayed. Because love, no matter how quiet, leaves proof. Deborah finally broke the silence. "This doesn't change anything," she said, her tone tight. "You can't just walk in after years and—" "Years of what?" I asked. "Working? Paying her bills when you couldn't? Checking on her when no one else did?" My words weren't loud, but they landed hard. Michael's shoulders dropped. For a moment, he looked younger, smaller somehow, like the golden sun had finally run out of shine. I folded the paper back along its crease and slipped it into my bag. No one stopped me. I could feel the heat of their stares, but I didn't care. My heart wasn't racing this time. It was steady. As I stood, Deborah's voice followed me, low and bitter. "You think this gives you power?" I turned to her. "No," I said softly. "It just gives me peace." The look on her face froze mid-thought, like she couldn't decide whether to speak or stay silent. I didn't wait to see which she chose. I walked to the door, my footsteps the only sound left in the room. Behind me, I heard the faint rustle of paper as Michael read the signature again. Then his voice, barely above a whisper. "It's really her." Michael's house always felt too clean, like it was trying too hard to look like peace lived there. The dining table was still covered with the papers from our last meeting. He'd spread them out again tonight, neat stacks of printed pages, folders, and a calculator that clicked every few minutes. Deborah was sipping wine, tapping her nails against the glass, and pretending she wasn't waiting for me to say something she could tear apart. I'd brought the medical documents, the ones signed by Mom. They were folded inside a thin envelope in my purse, the same envelope she'd written my name on. I set it on the table between us. "The doctor called this morning," I said. "Mom's condition hasn't changed. He asked about the care plan." Deborah smiled without looking up. "And?" I drew in a slow breath. "She made her wishes clear. Hospice, not life support." Michael's head snapped up. "What did you just say?" "She didn't want machines keeping her alive," I said quietly. "She told the doctor that herself before she signed this. The directive gives me authority to follow her wishes." His face went red. "You're saying you get to decide when she dies?" "That's not what I said," I replied. "I'm making sure she gets what she asked for." Deborah let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, please. You probably told her what to sign. You've been hanging around the hospital long enough to know how to twist a few words. I felt the insult land, but I didn't let it show. I'd learned long ago that silence unsettles people more than anger. You think I'd do that to her? I asked softly. Deborah leaned forward. I think you like the control. You couldn't have it when she was healthy, so now you've got it while she can't talk back. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. This isn't about control, I said. It's about love. You'd know that if you'd stayed long enough to see her fade. Michael stood, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. You can't make that call alone, he said. We're all family here. I met his eyes. Then maybe act like it. He flinched, just barely. Deborah tried to fill the silence. You sound so righteous for someone who's about to inherit everything. I mean, come on, Clara. The nurse daughter holding the pen? How convenient. That word, nurse, the way she said it, like it was dirty. I'd spent my life cleaning wounds, holding hands, whispering comfort to strangers who had no one else. And here I was being called greedy for it. I lifted my head slowly. Greedy, I repeated. That's what you think this is? Deborah crossed her arms. Isn't it? For the first time that night, I smiled. Not wide, not proud, just tired. I've been her nurse all my life, I said. I just never got paid for it. The room froze. Deborah blinked like she didn't understand what I meant. Michael's jaw tightened. The only sound was the soft tick of the clock above the fireplace. I pushed the envelope toward him. You can read the papers if you want. It's her signature, her decision. I'm just the one who stayed. He looked at the document but didn't reach for it. You think this makes you better than us? He said. You think this gives you power? I shook my head. No, it gives her peace. Something in him snapped. His fist came down on the table loud enough to make Deborah jump. You think this gives you power? He shouted again, louder this time. Wait until the lawyer reads the will. I didn't flinch. His anger didn't scare me anymore. I'd seen it my whole life, in smaller ways, in quieter rooms, always when he felt something slipping out of his hands. Now he was finally realizing that control wasn't love, and money wasn't worth what he thought it was. He grabbed the calculator and slammed it shut, breathing hard. Deborah touched his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. I stayed seated, calm, watching the surface of the table where his fist had landed. The ring he wore had left a dent in the wood. Maybe this was the moment I stopped trying to fix things. Maybe love wasn't about being loyal to pain. Maybe it was about walking away from it. Do you think money ever shows someone's true face? Or just gives them permission to drop the mask? Most of the time the room was quiet. Machines hummed softly. Monitors beeped steady like tired metronomes. I'd sit there and talk to her, not because I thought she could hear, but because silence has weight when you're alone. I'd tell her about the patients I'd cared for that week, how some made me laugh and some reminded me of her. I told her about the lilies I kept on her windowsill and how the sunlight caught their petals every morning. She didn't move, didn't respond, but I like to think she knew I was there. By the third week, the visits from Michael and Deborah turned into brief appearances. They'd arrive in nice clothes, holding coffee cups, talking louder than the nurses, like they needed everyone to notice how devoted they were. They'd take a few pictures, whisper about updates, and leave before the hour ended. I stopped looking up when they came in. I didn't need to hear the excuses, traffic, meetings, exhaustion. Everyone's always busy until they're not. I caught them once in the hallway. Deborah was saying, "She's milking this sympathy thing. You know how nurses get? They thrive on it." I turned the corner too early and met her eyes. She froze, then gave a smile so tight it hurt to look at. "Oh, Clara, we were just talking about scheduling the doctor's meeting," she said quickly. I nodded. "Of course," I said. "You should schedule as many as you need." She didn't catch the edge in my voice. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. Pretending had always been her skill. That night, one of the younger nurses came to me quietly while changing the IV line. "Your mother was very proud of you," she said. She told us that before she slipped into deep sleep. I almost thanked her, but the words wouldn't come out. I just smiled and looked away. Pride was something my mother showed sparingly, like a luxury she couldn't afford. Hearing it, now, through a stranger, felt like finding sunlight in a locked room. The next afternoon, Michael arrived without Deborah. He was wearing a suit, one that didn't fit him quite as well as it used to. He looked restless, tapping his fingers on his phone, waiting for someone. Then I saw him glance toward the hallway and stand up straighter. A man in a dark gray suit walked in, briefcase in hand, calm as a shadow. "This is Mr. Lawson," Michael said when I looked over. "He's handling some legal matters for Mom." "Legal matters?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my pulse wasn't. Michael shrugged. "Just standard stuff. Asset transfers, property details, nothing for you to worry about." The lawyer smiled politely, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the look people give when they were trying to keep something contained. I'd seen that same look in patients' families right before they asked to sign papers they didn't understand. "I wasn't aware anything needed transferring," I said. Michael laughed softly. "Of course you weren't. You're busy with the medical side. I'm handling the rest." I didn't answer. Some silences are sharper than words. He kept talking, something about how Mom would have wanted things organized, how it was better this way. I let him speak, let him fill the air with all that self-assured noise. When the lawyer opened his briefcase, I caught a glimpse of a white envelope with bold black writing across the front. The words made my stomach tighten, "To be opened upon death." He slipped it aside quickly, covering it with another folder. My breath caught before I could stop it. "What's that?" I asked quietly. Mr. Lawson blinked, surprised. "Just some documentation for future reference," he said smoothly. Michael's eyes darted toward me, just for a second too long. "It's not important right now," he said. But I knew that tone. I'd grown up under it. It was the same one he used when he'd already decided I didn't deserve to know something. I stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. "If it's about Mom," I said, "it's my business." Mr. Lawson hesitated, then closed the briefcase. "Everything will be handled in due time," he said. "For now, focus on her care." I didn't move. I just stared at that briefcase, the way his hand hovered over it protectively. The room felt colder than usual. When he finally walked out, Michael stayed behind for a moment. He looked at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Then he just muttered, "You always make things harder than they need to be," and left. The door closed behind him, but the sound stayed in my chest. Harder than they need to be. That's what they called it. Whenever I refused to disappear, I turned back toward my mother's bed, watching the faint rise and fall of her breathing. Somewhere in that briefcase was another secret with my name hanging in. It, waiting to be opened. The machines hummed their slow rhythm beside me, a sound so steady it almost felt alive. The room was dim except for the small glow from the monitor and the soft light by the window. I'd been sitting there for hours, just listening to the sound of her breathing. It was thin, uneven, but still there. Every few minutes, I reached out to smooth her blanket, like I used to do when she'd fall asleep on the couch after working long shifts. I told myself it was just habit, but maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the only way I still knew how to care for her without words. Her hand looked smaller now, the skin papery and cold. I brushed my thumb over her fingers. "You always hated hospitals," I whispered. "You said they smell like endings." I tried to smile, but it came out as something else. The clock above the door ticked too loudly, marking a night that refused to end. I remembered the last time we'd spoken before she got sick. She'd called to tell me Michael had surprised her with a new washing machine. She sounded so happy, proud even. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift and could barely keep my eyes open. I told her I'd talk to her later. I never did. That thought clung to me now like a stain I couldn't wash out. The monitor beeped softly. I leaned closer, resting my elbows on the edge of the bed. Her face looked peaceful, almost like she was somewhere far from all of this. For a long time, I used to think she was stronger than me, that she could endure things I couldn't. But now I wondered if maybe she just knew how to disappear better. I thought about the small things, the nights we braided each other's hair when I was little, the way she used to hum while washing dishes. I remembered standing at the sink with her when I was 14, scrubbing pans while Michael shouted from the living room for her to bring him snacks. She just smiled at me and said, "He's the loud one. You're the steady one." At the time, I thought she meant it kindly. Now I wasn't sure. Maybe steadiness was just another word for silence. The air in the room felt colder. I pulled the blanket higher on her chest, tucking it beneath her arms. "You know," I said quietly, "I used to think you didn't see me at all. But you did, didn't you? You just didn't know what to do with someone who stayed." The words felt heavy leaving my mouth. I'd spent years pretending I didn't need answers, but tonight, I wanted at least one. The hallway light spilled under the door, faint and golden. Somewhere outside, I heard the wheels of a gurney squeak across the tile, followed by distant voices. Everything in the hospital moved in patterns. People coming, people going, lives ending, lives beginning. I wondered what tomorrow would look like when her name was on a different kind of paper. I unfolded the letter again, running my thumb over the crease where the ink had bled slightly. "Don't let them take that from you." I thought about what she meant by them. Michael, of course, Deborah, maybe even the part of the world that taught her to love louder sons and quieter daughters. I'd let them take a lot over the years, moments, peace, pride, but maybe not this one, not the last piece of what she'd left for me. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment. The hum of the machines, the faint buzz of fluorescent light. It all faded into one long, tired song. My mind drifted to the porch of our old house, the one she'd loved so much. I could almost smell her coffee and the cheap gardenia soap she used to keep by the sink. Funny how the small things outlive everything else. I reached for her hand again, pressing it gently between mine. "It's okay, Mom," I said. "You can rest now. You did enough." The words cracked halfway out, but I didn't stop them. I just sat there, listening to the sound of her breath and the low hum that filled the room. Then, in the stillness, something shifted. A small twitch against my palm, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. Her fingers moved just once, brushing weakly against mine. My heart caught in my throat. "Mom?" I whispered. Her hand stayed still, but the air changed. For the first time in days, she wasn't just a patient. She was still here. Somewhere inside that quiet body, a part of her had reached back. I didn't call for the nurse. I didn't move. I just sat there holding her hand, afraid that if I let go, it would stop again. The machines kept their rhythm, the same soft hum, but everything else felt different now. I stayed that way until my legs went numb, until the clock moved past midnight. Her fingers never moved again, but that one small twitch, it was enough to keep me from breaking. The sky outside the hospital window was still dark when I realized her breathing had changed. The sound had softened, almost gone thin around the edges, like a candle flickering before it burns out. I sat closer, leaning forward so I could hear every fragile rise and fall. My hands were already wrapped around hers, fingers cold against my skin. I didn't call anyone. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to delay. Just this, her and me, the last quiet hours between us. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender lotion. I'd been using it on her hands every morning, even when no one else thought it mattered. The nurses didn't say much anymore. They just nodded when they saw me. I think they knew she was waiting for me to stop holding on before she did. The monitor blinked in steady rhythm, each beep slower than the last. I whispered her name once, not to wake her, just to make sure she wasn't leaving without hearing it one last time. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a sound. Her eyelids didn't move, but a single tear slipped down her cheek, so faint I might have imagined it. That was enough. I thought about all the years that had passed between us, the arguments, the silences, the way she'd always defended Michael no matter what he did. The times she'd said, "You're strong, Clara, you'll be fine," like it was a comfort when really it was an excuse to look away. I'd resented her for it. I'd carried that weight for so long I'd forgotten what forgiveness even looked like. But sitting there in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of anger. The monitor gave one last slow tone before falling silent. I waited, hoping it would start again, but it didn't. The machine caught the stillness first, and then so did I. Her hand felt heavier in mine. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there, watching the light through the blinds slowly shift from gray to gold. Morning had arrived, quiet and indifferent. I pressed my forehead to her knuckles. "It's what you wanted," I whispered. "No tubes, no machines." The words trembled, but I didn't. Grief comes in layers: shock, relief, guilt, and love, all tangled into one long breath you forget to take. I stayed like that until the nurse came in and touched my shoulder gently. "I'm so sorry," she said. I nodded, not trusting my voice. By the time Michael arrived, the sun was already up. His voice echoed down the hallway before he even reached the door. "Where is she?" he demanded. When he saw the sheet pulled up over her chest, his steps faltered. His eyes darted to me. "When did it happen?" "A few hours ago," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "And you didn't call me?" I met his glare. There wasn't time. He looked around the room like he was searching for something to blame. His voice rose, sharp and cold. "You did this, didn't you? You made the decision." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, the same way I used to when we were kids, and he'd broken something and tried to make it my fault. Old habits don't die. They just learn new faces. "It's what she wanted," I said softly. His laugh came out bitter. "Convenient, isn't it? The one holding the papers gets to decide everything." "I didn't decide anything," I said. "She did." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You never forgave her for loving me more. You're getting your revenge now." For a moment, the words didn't even sting. They just felt tired. "Michael," I said, "you're making this about yourself because it's easier than facing what she chose." His eyes flickered. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said. "I just learned when to stop fighting for people who don't see me." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the door creaked open again. The nurse who'd been with me earlier walked in holding a small folder and an envelope. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said gently. "Your mother left instructions with the staff before her condition worsened." Michael frowned. "Instructions?" She nodded, looking between us. Her will and medical directive were updated recently. She was very clear about what she wanted and who she trusted to handle it. He turned to me, suspicion written all over his face. "Of course she was," he muttered. The nurse ignored him and handed me the folder. "She asked that this be given to you first," she said. I took it slowly, feeling the weight of it settle in my lap. The edges were warm from her hands, her name written across the front in shaky ink. Michael's face darkened as his eyes followed mine to the envelope. "What is that?" he asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The nurse gave me a small nod before leaving the room, her steps soft on the linoleum. The door clicked shut behind her, and the air thickened. Michael stared at me, his voice low and sharp. "You've been planning this, haven't you? Controlling everything from the start." I looked down at the envelope, tracing the uneven letters of my name. "No," I said quietly. "I just listened to her." His hands curled into fists, but he didn't say anything else. He stood there for a long moment, then turned away, muttering something under his breath that I didn't bother to catch. I just kept my eyes on the folder. The sound of the machines had stopped, but somehow the room still hummed with her presence. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. And yet, deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. Her final words, her signature, the choices she'd made, none of it would stay buried for long. The lawyer's office smelled like dust and polished wood, the kind of place where silence carried more weight than words. I sat near the end of the table, hands folded in my lap, eyes on the floor. Michael and Deborah took the seats closest to the lawyer, leaning back like they already knew what was coming. Michael had that half smile he always wore when he thought he'd won before the game even started. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and opened the folder. "Thank you all for coming," he said. His voice was even, practiced, but I saw the flicker of something behind his eyes. Hesitation. It was the first sign that what came next wasn't going to go the way Michael expected. Michael glanced at me, his tone light. "Don't look so nervous, Clara. I'm sure Mom left you something sentimental. Maybe her favorite vase." Deborah laughed quietly, resting a manicured hand on his arm. "Or her old recipes. You can start a scrapbook." I didn't answer. I just looked at the folder in front of the lawyer, the pages trembling slightly as he turned them. "As stated in the late Mrs. Steve's last will and testament," he began, "this document supersedes all previous versions." His words came carefully, like he was stepping over glass. "All property, financial assets, and personal belongings, including the family home, are to be transferred in full to her daughter, Clara Steve." The air changed. For a second, no one moved. The only sound was the soft creak of the leather chair beneath him. Then Michael laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You're joking," he said. "That's not right. There must be a mistake." Deborah's eyes darted to me, then back to the lawyer. "You mean she left everything to her?" she asked, her voice tightening with every word. "Yes," the lawyer said simply. "Your mother left a personal letter to accompany this decision." He opened another envelope and unfolded a handwritten page. She wanted her words read aloud. Deborah groaned softly. Michael muttered something under his breath, but the lawyer kept reading. "My daughter, Clara, carried the family when I could not. When others were busy chasing success, she stayed to hold what remained together. This is not about favoritism. It is gratitude." The room went still again, the kind of stillness that makes you aware of every breath. My fingers trembled under the table, not from pride, but from something deeper, the ache of finally being seen when it no longer mattered. Michael leaned forward, his voice rising. "She wasn't in her right mind. You can't expect us to believe she—" "She was," the lawyer interrupted firmly. "She signed this in my presence, fully aware and deliberate. There are witnesses." Deborah slammed her hand on the table. "This isn't final. We'll contest it." Her voice cracked like glass. I lifted my eyes slowly. "You can do whatever you need to," I said. My voice was steady, calm. "But you'll still have to live with what she wrote." Michael's jaw tightened. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said quietly. "It just means she finally saw the truth." For a moment, no one spoke. The lawyer cleared his throat again, uncomfortable now, and began gathering the papers. Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Come on, Deb," he said. "We'll see how long this lasts." They walked out without looking back. The door closed behind them, the sound sharp and final. I sat there a little longer, staring at the folder in front of me. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired. For years, I'd been invisible in this family, the one who stayed, who cleaned, who cared, who was never enough. And now, because of one letter, I suddenly mattered again. Isn't it strange how the same people who ignored you suddenly remember your worth when it costs them something? I folded the letter carefully, tracing the faded ink of her handwriting. For once, I didn't need to say anything more. The truth was already written, and it was finally mine. The first time I heard the rumor, it came from one of the younger nurses. She caught me in the hallway, eyes wide with sympathy. "Clara, is it true what he's saying?" I didn't ask who. I already knew. When people say he in that tone, there's never any confusion. Michael had been busy. I could feel his fingerprints on every whisper. Words like manipulation, deceit, greed. They followed me through the hospital corridors like ghosts. At first, I ignored them. Rumors have a short shelf life when faced with silence. But then one of my patients' families pulled me aside, saying they'd heard I took advantage of my dying mother. The way they said it, soft, careful, made it worse. That's when I realized Michael wasn't just angry. He was trying to destroy what little peace I had left. Still, I didn't fight back. I didn't need to. My colleagues did it for me. One by one, they came to my defense without being asked. Karen from records printed the hours I'd clocked caring for Mom at the hospice. Unpaid, unrequested. David from accounting showed the wire transfers I'd made over the years, helping Mom cover mortgage payments when Michael had forgotten. I hadn't even remembered half of them. Seeing it on paper felt strange, almost foreign, like reading someone else's kindness. The next day, Deborah found me in the hospital cafeteria. I saw her reflection before I saw her, standing behind me, arms crossed, face tight with something between anger and guilt. "You must be proud of yourself," she said, her voice too loud for the quiet room. "Taking everything. Making Michael look like the bad guy. Was that your plan all along?" I set my coffee down. "I didn't make him look like anything. He did that on his own." She leaned closer. "He's devastated, Clara. You should have just shared. You didn't need to humiliate him." I looked at her, really looked. There was no grief in her eyes, just fear of losing comfort. "You wanted her things," I said softly. "I just wanted her peace." That stopped her. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. Her lips pressed together, trembling just slightly. Then she straightened and turned away. I watched her walk out, her heels clicking against the tile like punctuation marks to a conversation that had already ended long ago. When she was gone, I sat for a while longer, letting the hum of the vending machine fill the silence. It's strange how truth doesn't always bring relief. Sometimes it just leaves you empty, realizing there's nothing left to prove. I gathered my things and started toward the elevator. When my phone buzzed in my pocket, it was Michael. I almost ignored it, but something in me said to answer. His voice came through, tight and impatient. "The doctor called," he said. "He wants both of us to come in for a final signature." I didn't respond right away. The elevator doors closed in front of me, sealing me in with the faint smell of disinfectant and the hum of machinery. "Fine," I said finally. "I'll be there." As the elevator began to move, I caught my reflection in the steel door. Calm, steady, unreadable. The kind of face you learn to wear after years of being underestimated. The pen felt heavier than it should have. The paper waited in front of me, neat and official, every line printed in black ink. I stared at the form for a moment before picking up the pen. My name was already typed at the top. Clara Steve, primary healthcare proxy. The doctor's tone was calm, practiced. "This is just a formal transfer of authority, Ms. Steve," he said. "You'll be the sole signatory from this point on." I nodded and signed. My hand didn't tremble, though my chest felt tight. Years of watching from the sidelines had trained me for stillness. I set the pen down gently, almost ceremonially, then looked up. Michael sat across the table, his knee bouncing, the air around him tense. Deborah sat beside him, arms crossed, eyes darting between me and the doctor. When I slid the form back across the desk, the doctor glanced at it, then turned toward Michael. "For record purposes," he said evenly, "you are not listed as next of kin. Only Ms. Clara Steve." The doctor folded his hands. "Your mother's records were last updated 6 months ago," he explained. "At that time, she appointed Ms. Steve as her sole medical and legal contact." Michael laughed, a short, angry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "That doesn't make sense. She'd never do that. She trusted me with everything." The doctor looked down at the papers again, then added quietly, "According to the file, she tried to reach you before making the change. There's a note here. No response after multiple calls." Deborah's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "He was busy. You can't just—" "Mrs. Hale," the doctor said politely, cutting her off, "your mother-in-law made her wishes very clear. She did not want any ambiguity regarding authority." The word authority landed like a stone in the middle of the room. Michael's shoulders stiffened. I could see the storm rising behind his eyes. Anger, confusion, pride, all tangled together. "So what now?" he asked, voice low. "You're saying I have no say in anything?" I met his gaze and spoke softly. "That's exactly what he's saying." His jaw worked, muscles tight. "You think this changes what you are to her? You were never—" I interrupted quietly. It doesn't change what I was. It just makes it official. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. You must feel pretty powerful right now. I looked down at the form. My name sat there, steady, black ink against white paper. No, I said. I just feel tired. The doctor cleared his throat, breaking the tension that had turned the air heavy. I'll file this immediately, he said. We'll update the hospital records to reflect Ms. Steve's authority. Deborah exhaled sharply, whispering under her breath. 6 months ago, after you refused her call. Michael froze. What? The doctor looked up again. That's in her file as well, he said, quietly. Your mother called you last spring to discuss her care preferences. She noted that you refused to speak to her and ended the call abruptly. The color drained from Michael's face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Deborah looked at him, startled, waiting for an explanation he couldn't give. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to add. The truth was sitting there, printed and time-stamped. The same silence he'd given her now filled the room. The doctor gathered his papers, stood, and excused himself. The door closed behind him, leaving the three of us in the quiet. Michael's eyes avoided mine. Deborah stared at the floor. I took the signed copy of the form and slipped it into my bag. My voice came out calm, steady. She just wanted to make sure someone would finally listen. Neither of them answered. Michael's voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. She called me? The words barely made it past his throat, like they cost him something just to say. I nodded slowly. She called everyone, I said. I was just the one who picked up. The quiet that followed was heavier than anger. It filled the room, pressing against every corner until it almost hummed. For years, he'd filled silence with his certainty, with orders, excuses, reasons why things were always someone else's fault. But now, he had nothing. His eyes dropped to the floor, and I could see the cracks forming in him. All that pride, all that control, dissolving into something he didn't know how to name. Shame looks different on every face. On his, it looked like disbelief. I didn't know, he said, his voice breaking. I swallowed hard. You didn't want to know. He looked up at me like I'd hit him. That's not fair. Neither was the way she waited, I said quietly. You told her you were too busy. She believed you would call back. She waited for weeks. I paused. Then she stopped waiting. Deborah shifted beside him, uncomfortable. She could have told us, she said softly, like the problem was still hers to control. I looked at her, tired. She did, I replied. You just didn't listen either. Michael's fingers dragged down his face as he whispered. I thought she was exaggerating. She always called about nonsense, about the neighbors, the weather. I didn't think... You didn't think it mattered, I finished for him. It's easier to call something nonsense when you don't want to face it. He nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes, but not falling. The silence that followed wasn't forgiveness. It was too late for that. But it was real, and that mattered more. In that moment, I realized revenge didn't always need words or battles. Sometimes, it was just truth finally being heard by the person who spent a lifetime avoiding it. The quiet truth of, she called me, hit him harder than any accusation ever could. He stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back. The sound echoed like a closing door. I need some air, he muttered. He didn't look at me as he left. Didn't look at Deborah either. He just walked out, the weight of his own choices following him down the hall. Deborah opened her mouth to speak, but I shook my head. Don't, I said softly. Not now. When she finally turned and followed him, I stayed where I was. The room felt still, stripped of all the noise that used to define us. The papers on the desk fluttered slightly from the air vent. Hospital forms, signatures, all the things that made grief official. I looked at the door he'd just walked through and let out a slow breath. For years, I thought justice would come with a fight. But standing there, in the silence he'd created, I understood it was quieter than that. He finally knew. And for once, I didn't have to explain anything. When the realtor handed me the final papers, I didn't feel victory. just quiet. The house stood behind me, empty, still carrying the scent of old wood and something softer, like my mother's hand cream. "You're sure about this?" he asked, looking uneasy. I nodded. Completely. Selling the house wasn't revenge, it was survival. There were debts to clear, taxes, and years of unfinished repairs that no one else would touch. Michael hadn't called once since the hospital. Deborah sent one text about family legacy, which I ignored. Legacy was just another word for control. The neighbors watched from their porches as the moving truck pulled away. Some waved, others whispered. I caught a few words. Heartless. So soon. Poor Michael. I didn't bother correcting them. Let them believe whatever made sense to them. People always fill silence with their own stories when you stop explaining yourself. I walked through the empty living room one last time. The light fell across the floor in long, tired stripes. Every corner carried an echo. The laughter that faded, the fights that lasted too long, the apologies that never came. I pressed my hand against the doorframe on my way out. "It's done now," I whispered. At the closing office, I signed the last document with steady hands. The balance sheet in front of me looked clean. No hidden strings, no shared names. For the first time in years, everything tied back to me alone. When the check cleared, I didn't hesitate. Half of it went straight to the hospital's hospice fund. The woman at the desk blinked at the donation form. "That's a generous amount," she said. I smiled faintly. "It's not generosity," I replied. "It's gratitude." My mother had found peace there. I wanted to make sure others could too. Weeks passed quietly after that. The city felt different without her house binding me to it. I spent my mornings walking through the park where no one knew my name, where no one looked at me like a headline in a small-town rumor. Sometimes I missed the noise of family chaos, the strange comfort of being needed. But peace has its own kind of company. Steady, unspoken, loyal. One afternoon, while paying bills online, I got a call from the hospital. It was the nurse who'd been with us on my mother's final day. Her voice carried a warmth that reached right through the phone. "Clara, I just thought you should know. The new sign went up this morning." I didn't understand at first. "Sign?" "The hospice wing," she said. "It's official now, the Evelyn Steve Memorial Wing." For a second, I couldn't speak. The name sat there in my ear like a heartbeat, gentle and final. "Thank you," I managed. After I hung up, I sat by the window, watching the wind move through the trees. Somewhere in that quiet, I realized I'd finally done what she asked. I hadn't let them take what mattered, not her peace. No. When I looked up from the patient chart, he was already standing there. Michael. He looked older, thinner, his eyes softer in a way I didn't remember. "I didn't come for money," he said quietly. "Just to say sorry." For a moment, I just studied him. The same voice that once held arrogance now carried something fragile. I set the chart down and folded my hands. "You don't owe me anything," I said. He shook his head. "I owe you more than I can fix. You were right. About everything." His voice cracked, and the sound hit me harder than I expected. I waited. Years had taught me that silence reveals more than questions ever could. He took a slow breath. "I thought she'd live forever. I thought there'd be time to explain, to make it right. When she called, I didn't answer because I didn't want to hear her disappointment. I was a coward." His honesty didn't sting. It felt almost quiet, like rain after a long drought. "She forgave you," I said softly, "long before you ever asked." He looked at me, searching my face for anger that wasn't there. "And you?" "I forgave you too," I said, "but not for you. For me." He exhaled like something inside him finally let go. "I kept waiting for you to hate me," he said. I smiled faintly. I did for a while. Then I realized hate only keeps you standing in the same place. I had to walk away. The hallway noise filled the small space between us. Footsteps, distant pages, the sound of life moving on. He looked around the hospital lobby, eyes landing on a framed photo of the new hospice wing. "You did this," he said quietly. I nodded. She deserved something that lasted longer than her pain. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. You always were the better one. I shook my head. No, I was just the one who stayed. He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded photo. Mom sitting in the garden, sunlight caught in her hair. She kept this, he whispered. It's yours now. I took it carefully, feeling the faint texture of her handwriting on the back. Love, always. When he turned to leave, I didn't stop him. Some goodbyes are meant to be wordless. He walked out through the glass doors, the sunlight catching on his shoulders like forgiveness made visible. I looked back at the plaque on the wall, the Evelyn Steve Memorial Wing, my mother's name, shining quietly beneath the hospital lights. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "We both found peace, Mom." And this time, I meant it. As I handed the folder back, I caught my reflection in the office window. For the first time in a long while, I saw someone whole. Not the quiet daughter standing behind louder voices. Not the woman who tried too hard to make peace where none was offered. Just me, calm, steady, unafraid. I walked down the hospital corridor, the one I used to dread. The floor's hum was familiar, the distant beep steady like a heartbeat. I passed rooms where I'd once sat sleepless, counting breaths, praying for one more hour. Now, there was no weight pressing on my chest, no fear left to hold. Outside the hospice wing, the new plaque gleamed beneath the light, the Evelyn Steve Memorial Wing. I stopped and ran my fingers over the letters, cool and perfect. You got your wish, Mom, I whispered. You're helping people, even now. A nurse passed by and smiled softly. It's a beautiful thing you did, she said. I smiled back. It wasn't just me, I replied. She did most of it. I just finished what she started. As I turned toward the exit, I noticed a few familiar faces, neighbors, old family acquaintances. Some gave polite nods. Others whispered like they always had. She sold everything, one murmured. Can you believe it? I didn't look their way. Their opinions had stopped mattering a long time ago. They saw loss, I saw freedom. They saw emptiness, I felt peace. The sunlight outside was sharp, clean. It touched the glass doors, reflecting my face back at me. Not invisible, not forgotten, but seen. The same hallway where I'd once felt small now seemed wider, like it had been waiting for me to breathe again. I thought about Michael, about how he'd shown up, said sorry, and left with eyes that finally looked like his own. Maybe that was enough. Maybe we both found a kind of peace in different ways. I didn't need his approval anymore, and I didn't need to prove I was the good one. I just needed to be done. Peace doesn't come like thunder. It comes like a sigh, quiet, slow, almost unnoticed until you realize it's been there the whole time, waiting for you to stop fighting. I walked past the reception desk, through the same doors where it all began, and the moment I stepped into the parking lot, I felt lighter. My heart didn't race. My shoulders didn't ache. The air smelled like the first day of something new. I smiled, just a small one. You were right, Mom, I said quietly. It wasn't about keeping things. It was about letting go. The wind carried my words away, and for the first time, I didn't reach to take them back. They laughed when I walked into that hospital room, but I walked out with something they'll never have: peace. If you've ever learned that silence can be strength and that kindness isn't weakness, you'll understand why I told this story. Thank you for listening and for standing with stories like mine. Don't forget to subscribe if you believe quiet people deserve to be heard.